Morning, Art. Glad to see you. We are launched and all is well. I am recovering from my carpal tunnel um, surgery. I just have this on for protection at the moment, just to protect the wound, but I'm going to take the bandage off after this session. So there's what it looks like bandaged. Um, I guess I got a little bruising there, but otherwise it's looking good to me. And so after this meeting, I will be removing the bandage and just exposing the sutures. And this is the one I did last month or in August 22nd, and it's pretty well recovered at this point. So carpal tunnel surgery was mandated by the fact that I was waking up and in the morning my hands would be numb, and sometimes they would turn numb when I was driving, which was another issue. And so I could go like this and get them to have feeling in them again, but then gradually it became too much, and I would wake up in the morning and my two hands would feel like clubs. Uh, and, and I really couldn't do anything with them if I didn't have any feeling. And the surgeon told me that if I didn't do something, I'd have permanent nerve damage. So that's why I went ahead and did it. But anyway, I've done it now, and I'm glad to see people are gathering. We're about to begin uh, our session for today. I'm hoping someone will join me to share the load. But in the meantime, uh, I'm working with Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And I'm still in volume one. There are 5 volumes of this, and I think it's worthwhile to teach through the different perspectives. And here is Jordan having arrived. And there he is. Hi, Jordan. Welcome.
Morning. Sorry, I'm late. Yeah,
Good to see you.
you
Uh,
too.
yeah, I'm curious how you come up. You come up over me in this image, but I'm curious how you suddenly appear on YouTube. We're side by side on YouTube. Interesting.
Yeah, I've got, let me try this. I've got, because I have side by side here. I wonder if I put, does that change it?
No.
Okay.
So, okay. So this is the week that was, and our thoughts and uh, everything that our federal government can do to help people in North Carolina is being done, I think. Uh,
Oh, did
it's,
they finally start? Did FEMA find a dollar or two?
oh, I'm sure they did have, uh, they were, I think there's you know, fake news that FEMA doesn't have money, because FEMA certainly has money and is on the ground. And um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I saw some statistics that said they had already delivered. They've delivered about 100,000 tarps, among other things, believe it or not, which I guess helps people cover their belongings until they can get them under a proper
But
shelter.
depending on, that's the thing with AI and all. I mean, fake news versus actual news.
Yeah.
It At first it was like no response, and then tepid response, and then no, they're there and they're arresting people trying to help, and then that's not true, and then it is true. I There's
Yeah,
a lot of
I think we can no longer rely
yeah.
on on Twitter and that sort of thing. I certainly don't rely on Twitter anymore since Elon Musk took it over because he's promoting. He was on the stage yesterday with the former president and claiming that he has the right, the freedom of speech. Yes, he does. But um, I think uh, he's also, as I understand it, he's autistic, and so he gets on a hobby horse and rides it to the bottom. And I too believe in freedom of speech, but I believe in common sense also. And so I'm not very happy about what he's done with X since he took it over.
Well, and that and the freedom of speech backfiring to where idiots can lie and say whatever, and then people will believe it, and then you have the fact checkers that's just censorship, which means whatever the platform doesn't want said doesn't get said. Um, it's a mess. It's a mess. I mean,
I'm sorry, we lost you from the time when you said idiots can take it over. So,
oh,
with,
the First Amendment piece implemented there backfiring where idiots can lie and say whatever. I mean, half the time we know, how do you know a politician's lying? Well, their mouth's moving. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So, and that's both sides, and it always has been. But it's interesting to me. I mean, someone the other day, I think it was on Facebook, which I rarely go on, because I mostly post from Instagram. But someone said, "Well, people who need to be fact checked are liars." It's like, no, no, no. Fact checking is not facts. It's fact checking is another word for censorship or
mhm,
for, I mean, the platform decides what algorithm, what words do they not want to see. And, I mean, there'll be something that's pretty much wonderful in its concept. And like the last sentence says, so we should preclude terror in people's lives. But because of that last word, terror, I mean, boom, it's flagged.
yeah.
So I think honestly now I just kind of keep an austere, tight-lipped, one eyebrow up skepticism,
Yeah.
and just stick with what the post is trying to say, not with what everyone else tries to say. I mean,
Well, and even the posts can't be relied on anymore. So each of us has to use our own common sense, which, relates back to the fact that we, in many states, have stopped teaching social studies. So people can't even think about it. They don't even know what to think.
and so,
Um,
I mean, I
I mean, that's not true in my state. We do teach social studies through high school in my state as one of four major areas. And indeed, I'm now certified in social studies.
I
Uh, thank goodness.
well,
But
I think the idiot piece too is there was a post yesterday on Instagram about five friends each save $50 a week for 2 years to pool their money, 26 grand, to buy their first investment property. And this, I said some comment about the math, because at first it was 1 year and not 2 years. And I'm like, and then of course, whoever authored it edited the post later. So people are saying, you're wrong, it's 2 years. It's like, well, it was 1 year originally. And then someone chimes in and says, I don't see why you're taking issue with people investing in distressed properties. Like the word distressed was never there. And then it
mhm,
comes out with, well, most people invest in distressed properties more than others. I'm like, that's not what the post said. It said
right.
investment property. So the fact that people will chime in a fiction, add a concept or a word, and like you said, then go off on a hobby horse. It's And the
Yeah.
fact that they're getting so stirred up, frankly, about nothing.
So I often think of the term hidebound,
Yeah,
because and we're going to talk about the murder of the hero here. And Jung in his day was a somewhat hidebound conservative German, who very much believed in the myth of the hero Siegfried,
hmm
and and to believe in to believe in a myth doesn't mean that it isn't real. It Because it is very real, and it does operate in people's psyches, and this is what we've not understood in terms of all this Jungian education here, that um, the psyche is indeed very real, and the objects of the psyche are real. And so if you uh, believe something in the psyche, then it is real. and and so here we're going to talk about the murder of the hero. And I'm on page 186 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. Murray Stein and Thomas Arst are the editors. And
it's funny you mentioned hidebound because um, last week, Wednesday or Thursday, I think hidebound was the word that came up on Word Genius, just a daily
yeah,
word,
mhm,
email.
right.
And of course, I started laughing. I'm like, oh, tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. The only thing that limits you is your imagination. But it's funny because I hadn't heard that word in so long, and it's so literally self-defining. I mean, hidebound, you're
Yeah,
stuck in your skin, where your limits are what you've seen instead of what you can imagine.
yeah. Well, and I can imagine a lot of things, and so I'm
Yes.
just uh, typing into the chat here the biblical reference that I'm going to make here, because yesterday was my birthday, and
Birthday.
I turned, believe it or not, 78 years old yesterday. It's hard for me to believe that because I don't feel that old. But anyway, I did get one lovely birthday present, which I had requested from my wife, and that is a new cane. And so my new cane ha
Oh, look at that.
has a rattlesnake on it all the way down, all the way down.
That's
And
cool. That's cool.
yes, it is. My kids at school have not seen it yet, and you could have it engraved with anything you wanted. So I had it engraved with the words "Look and Live," uh, which is some pastors use it in preaching this particular section of Numbers. Um, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how the kids react to this thing.
Nice.
Uh, and I'm hopeful I have the same success that Moses had with it. My suspicion, 3,500 years later, is that Moses had this dream in which God gave him a walking stick that he could throw down and it would become a snake. And I think the snakes that he was running into were actually um, the young Turks, not literally Turks, but the young bucks who were coming up in the Jewish community, and they'd been living in Sinai for 40 years. Can you imagine, the distance from Cairo or Alexandria, wherever they were, to to the promised land, Israel, uh, is about a 6-day march for a platoon of Marines if you have water. And
Mhm.
So Moses managed to stretch it out for 40 years. And so you can well imagine that the young men in his party were getting a little antsy about not moving on. And indeed, Moses himself never entered the promised land, I guess. He only saw it from a distance. Um,
Well, there's the whole
but
thing. It's only like 100 or so miles. It's just over that hill, and we've been sitting here for 40 damn years.
yeah,
So
well, it's 300 miles. It's a non-trivial distance, but
yeah,
it's pretty trivial for a modern human being to walk that distance. If you have water, you have to have water.
right.
And and so I can well imagine that the young guys in the Jewish community who had been brought up, some of them born in the Sinai, would have been pretty antsy to get on with finding the promised land. They kept to say, well, this isn't it. We're in a desert.
Right.
And so I think I have the impression that the snakes in that particular passage um, are metaphorical, and that something else was going on there. And but meanwhile, Moses had a snake, a bronze snake, put onto his walking stick, and apparently it caused enough dreams in his troops to settle them down. So anyway, that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. It's only a theory, however. We can't go back and see what really happened. But anyway, so now we're going to talk about the murder of the hero. The hero is Siegfried in German mythology. And so this is what whoever wrote this passage, Andreas Schweitzer, uh, said about it. The murder of the hero. Despite the increasing development of his career, Jung more and more realized that in order to survive, a murder was required of him. Not the murder of Philemon and Baucis, but just the opposite, the murder of the hero. Beginning with chapter 5 of the Red Book, the problematic aspect of the heroic becomes more and more obvious. In other words, the way of the spirit of the depths necessarily leads to the murder of the heroic. How could one find the way into the depths if not through the sacrifice of the great and heroic within, which is still striving for power? This, by the way, includes the great and heroic that hides itself behind the mask of false modesty, and at times even of the depression the devil in angels' clothes is, as we know, the worst to fight with. The fact that someone suffers from such behavior does not exclude the reality that they are secretly identified with the heroic within. In other words, just because one suffers from depression from childhood memories or from whatever does not necessarily mean that one is not in the grip of a power complex. When Jung became aware of his standstill, he had this impression, and as we will see, finally redeeming dream about the murder of Siegfried, that is, the murder of the brilliant solar hero. In this dream, he was in the company of an unknown, brown-skinned man, a savage, when Siegfried, their mortal enemy, was coming high across the mountains on a chariot made of the bones of the dead. He knew that they had to murder him, and indeed they fired at the same time, and Siegfried fell slain. Then a terrible rain swept down. We must be aware that Jung had the dream in December 1913, before the catastrophes of the two world wars. So even if it is a clear anticipation of these disasters, We must look at it from a psychological perspective rather than a purely historical one. We must ask what the murder of the hero means in the life of Western man in general. I am always puzzled by the fact that it is not clear who had finally killed Siegfried. Was it Jung or his companion, or both of them? We don't know. But what we do know is that after Jung had this dream, he went through a torment unto death. He immediately felt certain that he must kill himself if he could not solve the riddle of the murder of the hero. Unable to understand his dream, he tried to fall asleep again, but a voice within him said, "You must understand the dream and must do so at once." And not much later, the voice added, now really demanding, "If you do not understand the dream, you must shoot yourself." This was not at all an empty menace, since Jung always had a loaded revolver in the drawer of his night table. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and give Jordan a chance to comment. You're muted.
This to me is him coming up to what eventually would be his quote of, well, the first 40 years of life are just research.
Mm-hmm.
And the 42 is then the rite of passage of, then the death of the hero becomes the birth of the rest of your life, your way, not in the hidebound trappings of tradition, parents, etc., even in one's own career and directions. So I think what's interesting is not knowing whether it was him or the companion. There's kind of a firing squad psychology where only one of the guns has an actual bullet and all the rest are blanks, and none of them know which one in some firing squads. And then what happens is no one of them will carry they may have guilt, but they won't truly know that they're the one who caused the execution. So what's interesting there is he doesn't truly know. I mean, did his bullet hit? Did his companion's bullet hit? So in this sense, it's the reverse of, he needs to know for sure, because if someone else did it, he can't be sure it actually happened.
Yeah, and there's a question here on YouTube. The hero equals the superior function? Question mark. And I said yes.
I would agree.
Because you go through the first part of your life and you're building for an aim in your education, let's say. Perhaps I overdid it a bit because I stayed in university until I was 32 years old. I spent 10 years in university, and I acquired 3 degrees at that time and also a certificate in Mandarin Chinese, among other things. And so I thought that this was leading up to some great thing, namely the ability to practice law. But as soon as that time was over and I began to actually practice law, I began to also find out that I detested the practice of law. And so I did have a sort of midlife crisis, because you've built up in your mind how getting the law license and passing the bar and that stuff is sort of the goal, but that's not the case. It's actually just preparation. And nobody bothers to tell you that, oh, by the way, you might not like this. And, and probably even if they had told me, I wouldn't have agreed with them. I wouldn't have believed them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do remember, some sort of psychological test that early on and at the end of high school said, I should be an architect. And indeed, my personality type is the ideal architect, uh, ironically.
And that fits because, I mean, simple, the word architecture broken into its classic Greek roots, arche and techne. Arche is to create, and it's formless,
Mhm.
eros. It's and techne is to make, to put together, to give form to the formless, logos.
Right, right,
But
right,
together, but then you have to murder the eros and the logos and look and live, as to stick with your quote,
right,
because the creation has to be rolled into as the heart or marrow of the matter of the action. So then the space becomes alive. So it's interesting with the architecture piece because that fits. And and then similar, I mean, I was an architect for 30 years, so it's the kind of thing where it takes you, 10 years to unlearn all the bull that they put together in your head to actually go, oh, this isn't what I thought it was.
yeah. It's like one of my favorite tunes by Paul Simon. When I think of all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all.
No wonder I didn't think at all.
And when I think of all the stuff that I studied after college, is 6 years of higher education, actually. I mean, um, my Chinese language school, although it was 1 year, it was a total immersion course. And so it probably is equivalent to a master's degree in Chinese, although nobody would ever give us a master's degree. But and then when the Marine Corps wanted to send me to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, after my language school, and so I wrote to the commandant and said, "You're kidding, right?" And the commandant wrote back and said, "Okay, smartass, go to Vietnam."
It,
So so I got sent to Vietnam instead of I probably could have served another year or two maybe and gotten out of the Marine Corps without ever having to go to Vietnam. but um, but I thought I was on an international career that involved Asia, and I very much wanted to use the Chinese that I had studied. I have used it on occasion, um, but very rarely in the Marine Corps, only once in the Marine Corps. And that was to buy pottery for my general. You can imagine. Oh, it's such a joke. But anyway,
that's well, how funny. You bought a vessel, so there's the alchemy.
yep, there it is.
All languages.
And so the way this went down, um, finally, I've been in the field for 6 months, and I got assigned a job at division headquarters. And one day I got a note that the commanding general would like to see me, and so I went up to see him. Oh, it wasn't the commanding general; it was the assistant division commander, who was a brigadier general, and he said, "Well, I've been over here for a year now, and my wife made me promise to bring home pottery, and so here's a catalog from Taiwan. I want you to go and get this pottery ordered and ship it to my wife in the U.S." And so you get orders to go from Da Nang to Taipei, uh, do this task, and then come back. So uh, that was sort of cool because I'd been in Vietnam a few months and it was a chance to get a few days off. And so I flew first to QB Point in Philippines, which used to be part of uh, the naval base there. It was the air station. And then, let's see, how did I do this? I had to fly to Kubi Point, then to Okinawa. And from Okinawa, I had to take a commercial flight to Taipei. So I get to Taipei, and I rented from Special Services because they were doing R&Rs there. I rented from Special Services a truck, and the truck came complete with driver. So I showed him the address on this catalog, and he drove me out there. And sure enough, here's this pottery factory. And so I said, well, I want this, this, and this, and I want this shipped to this address. And they said, okay, no problem. And it took me no more than 30 minutes. And, it seems like it was even less than that. But anyway, I paid them. I had money from the general. I paid them. And then I had 5 days off in Taipei.
For 30 minutes of work, yeah.
Yeah, and then flew back to Da Nang. But anyway, it was quite an interesting experience. And
well, it's interesting because that's then, I mean, whether it was or wasn't, there's just this congruent seed of international commerce right there, where the American Marine doing business at the pottery factory. Well, that's just one of towards look at this little bitty thing, that this window sweep that we sell millions of yards of.
Yep. So anyway, I did use my Chinese on that occasion. I did, because I could speak to the proprietors there. And I was expecting to get an assignment after Vietnam to Taiwan, to the military assistance group in Taiwan. But oh no, when the time came for me to rotate out of Vietnam, I ended up having to call Washington on a satellite phone, and my monitor, the guy that did the assignment, said, no, Lieutenant Conover is going to Major Marine Corps Command CONUS, which means Continental U.S., and you're going to go to one of the major bases, and they will assign you to whatever they want to assign you to when you walk in the door. And so I decided at that moment to resign my regular commission. I had a regular commission, so I could have stayed in the Marines for 20 years active duty if I wanted to, but I decided to get out because for the last 3 months, I was living with the lawyers of the 1st Marine Division, the military judge, the trial counsel, and the defense counsel were all living in the same hooch with me, and they convinced me I should go to law school. So I decided to do that instead.
Nice.
And
that's
so
interesting. There are 3 of them there, right? Four.
3.
It's interesting because actually that makes me want to revisit the question of, is the hero the superior function? And what's interesting there, to open up the superior function, so it very simply, they're the 4 psychological functions: intuition, feeling,
Right.
thinking, and then sensation, or see, feel, touch, tangible, doing, external. But the superior function is just whichever one of those you rule with, that whichever one is the most prominent leader in your psyche. And so 4 types of heroes, the
Right.
intuitive, the feeler, the thinker, and then the doer. But it's interesting to me then you have to, of course, put in the inferior function, which is which one of those is less than. But it almost doesn't matter, because you have a trinity of the other 3, and triangles self-resolve their forces. So in that sense, the superior function leads the trinity of the other 3 as staff. So in a
Yeah.
sense, those three attorneys, basically fed uphill to
Hmm.
the leadership of you to
Which was
become.
my intuition told me that it was going to be better for me to go back to go to law school
Go to law school, right?
rather than go back and be a ground marine.
Right.
And I did end up staying in the reserve for 20 more years, which is a good thing because I got lifetime health care because of that. So all of my surgery, including these cute little things, um, I've never had a bill.
Yeah.
And that's, worth a bomb because, like, I know one of my surgeries, just my ankle, the cost was something like $42,000.
Well,
And
yeah. I mean, small time example. I went for a full metabolic panel and thyroid a couple of weeks ago, just because the alopecia gene, what triggered it,
yeah.
start to see if I could figure out what happened, and it's a couple $100, but a couple $100 for what, eight less than 8 minute blood draw,
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. But the travel to and from, I mean, it became a decent expense. But the thing is, then it's all out of my pocket,
Mhm.
because it's no doctor visit. It's just trying to find things out. But the thing is, then I paid $200 to find out that I'm just a picture of health with a high protein diet. It's so
There you go.
on to the next. But the no bill part, that gives you a freedom.
Right.
You can always not
So
put something off.
so obviously my hero complex was at work in that I went in the Marines sort of thinking that I would be a hero. I mean, I wasn't consciously thinking that, but um, I could not stand the idea of being a draft dodger, and I didn't want to serve in the Army because I'd been raised in the Navy.
Right.
So I split the difference and became a part of the Navy's Army.
Yeah.
And and then when I became a lawyer, I thought I would be a heroic lawyer, but that didn't turn out to be true because I detested the practice of law. And so I kept having to reinvent myself. And you have to you have to kill that hero complex in order to become what you did become. And I had some significant accomplishments between age geez, when did this start? In my mid 30s uh, until my 60s. I built a company, in fact, several companies in Asia, mostly in Japan and India, but throughout the Middle East, and uh, got to do a lot of the same things that the diplomats do. I mean, it got so weird that on one occasion, President George W. Bush was making a trip to the East, which was to Jerusalem, then to Riyadh, and then to Cairo. And I was making the same trip in the reverse direction: Cairo, Riyadh, Jerusalem. And I literally passed his motorcade in the dark one night. When let's see when I guess when I think I was leaving Riyadh and he was just arriving from Jerusalem. It was sort of a very interesting juxtaposition. And even though it wasn't like I was building tanks or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just working in hospitals. But anyway,
Well, the killing the hero reminds me of, I mean, working in a high-end residential architecture firm. We interviewed for this one commercial project, this um, luxury retail boutique,
mhm,
and we got the job. And I was project architect, and then we won commercial remodel of the year for the first commercial work we had done. Well, so then we get hired to do another retail shop. Well, what's interesting is then that client said, well, we should do, a little bit of what you did there because you won commercial remodel of the year.
Mhm.
And I remember just saying, this is not that.
Mhm.
And so, it's the hidebound piece. It's like, this is not that. You have different values and you have different priorities, and they
Yeah.
don't apply here. And it was interesting because then you're hired on this, image recognition, but then you have to unseat no, this is not going to look like that.
Yeah.
And then they get excited because then they're not hidebound by their own expectation of why they even started. So
Yeah.
it's a strange piece to, why were you hired? Okay, do you need to shed that skin, or is that why you were hired,
Right.
and do something? So you
Right.
passing the motorcade kind of reminds me of that there's no relation except there is a relation.
Yeah. Okay, so carrying on, maybe the next the next subtitle will explain this further.
Yeah, so
Accepting the
everybody out there in
absurd.
the audience, this is what Skip does to me. He accepts the absurd. So that's my point to be here.
Accepting the absurd. I won't go into the interpretation of the dream that Jung gave in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In the context of the Red Book, the dream was slightly different meaning, or has slightly different meaning. As the title of the Red Book says, The Way of What Is to Come suggests, Jung was striving for the future spirit from the very beginning onward. We have seen that the spirit of the future emerges from the spirit of the depths, as opposed to the spirit of this time. Jung's dream forced him to murder everything heroic within him in order to clear the way for the spirit of the depths. Obviously, the blonde solar hero takes no part in this future spirit, nor does he contribute anything to it. Rather, he is holding on to old values. So we must ask, what exactly is the heroic that is to be sacrificed? If we follow the Red Book, we realize in amazement that it particularly has something to do with accepting that which makes no sense. Soon after the murder of the hero, Jung heard the redeeming word when the spirit of the depths told him, quote, the highest truth is one and the same with the absurd. The German expression mit dem Widersingen, Sinnigen, is very difficult to translate. The sentence literally means the highest truth is one and the same with that which makes no sense, or even with that which is opposed to any sense or meaning. This statement saved me, and like a rain after a long hot spell, it swept away everything in me which was too highly tensed. And we can see this happening right now in our current events in the United States, where we have the self-proclaimed solar hero, the blonde self-proclaimed solar hero who doesn't realize that his day is gone yet. He will, and then we'll have this rainstorm that's going to clear all our minds, and over the next 2 to 4 years, we'll see a complete change of attitude in the United States, is what I expect.
And sticking here with the topic of the paragraphs, especially here, a lot of people will say intuition is irrational.
Mhm.
And to me, that's a presumptuous statement from the intellect describing the intuition. And the intellect has no business talking about the intuition. You should ask the intuition, because then the intuition would say, no, it's not irrational. All reasons are unreasonable. And then that's a tenable statement from the intuitive standpoint. So if you take the four different psychological types as four distinct identities, I mean, you have an intuition, reasons are unreasonable. Then there's a little bit of consciousness and look and live of feeling.
Mhm.
What do you feel about the intuition?
Yeah.
And what do you think about what you feel about the intuition? And then what do you do about what you think about what you feel about the intuition? So I think what's interesting is just the, rotating game of hot potato between the four psychological functions,
Yeah.
how things move through. I mean, the thing which is too highly tensed, for something to be tensed, it has to have material and direction, because there's compression and then there's tension. And so even that is a navigational nod in the end of this paragraph, where then, even notwithstanding opinion, the whole idea of appearance versus reality, how hidebound are any of us at any given time? And people ask, well, how are you going to vote? I'm an observer with a capital O right now.
Mhm.
And basically that's saying it's none of your business, because I don't want to enter into, all of a sudden everyone else is a political analyst. And because they read some meme on YouTube or something, and now they know everything. And I'm just like, wow, what part of the grocery store do you shop in? That seems that seems as relevant, to a conversation.
Well, at our age, my family has already voted, because I'm uh, pushing toward 80 now, and my mother-in-law is going to be 94 in December, and so we no longer take continuation of life as a given, although I'm feeling pretty healthy these
Yeah.
days. Um,
It's funny you say that, because I went just online just to check. I mean, I always, when I renew my driver's license, I always, yes, register to vote. That all that happened at one time.
mhm.
Well, my driver's license doesn't expire till next year, and late next year at that. But I just had this feeling. I went, am I registered to vote with all the monkey business that's going on?
Yeah.
Who's lost what file where? I go on, we don't have any record of you.
Oh boy.
I'm like, well, you mean like I'm an operative? It's like it's
This
a
is this is
shadow
this this is in New Mexico?
in Mexico. And what it is that when I moved from the East Coast and got the new driver's license here, I said, yes, relinquish voter registration in previous state,
Mhm.
list all that, and then apply for and receive voter registration in current state, New Mexico. And evidently, I got my voter registration card, but it never actually happened.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
you get it, and here's the thing: you assume, okay, it's all complete. I didn't think I should call them
Yeah.
and make sure. So basically, I had a hidebound piece of paper that said nothing.
Yeah.
So I go to register, and then there's a PO box on my driver's license, because when I first moved, I moved and I was living in a hotel for several months
Mhm.
while I got the place ready. Well, so my address was a PO box. So then I get two letters. Your new voter registration has been rejected for invalid addressing, because on your driver's license it says this, but you haven't provided information for that. So
I see.
I had to scramble, and now I'm expecting a letter this week with my new cards, but I'm going to have to, as soon as I get them, go online. Are these real? Is it finished? Which to
Yeah.
me is so wild, because you bird in hand, you would think, but honestly, bird in hand is often too blind and hidebound, where, okay, I need to confirm that this isn't counterfeit or it's active. Here's your card, but it's not active. So surprise, surprise, surprise,
Good,
surprise.
goodness gracious.
But
And
I think that just describes the environment. How
yeah, and of
much
course,
voting
same
system?
thing is happening all over the country, I presume. A
Yeah,
lot of
and so
people
it's
are doing
people
that.
talk about robbing elections. I think there's a lot of old equipment and bad filing systems. And then people make up stories about the fact that, well, that was just a defective operating system. I mean, so if I look at my situation, if I was a paranoid lunatic, I could make up some pretty good stories about, oh my God, they held me out of voting, they canceled it. None of those verbs happen.
Yeah,
Somebody was an idiot, or some software was broken,
yeah,
which makes it technologically an idiot. And so, I mean, it is what it is, and don't get all stirred up. Just
yeah.
solve the problem, and then make sure the solved problem is in place.
Right. So
Anyway,
in the beside the next paragraph, I have written in the margin the word experience. Now, I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote that, so let's read the paragraph. So at the beginning of the Red Book, we often hear the Wiedersehen, uh, of which is opposed to or deprived of any meaning. The historical background of this idea must be sought in the writings of the Gnostics, to whom Jung felt quite attached in those years, mainly because of their emphasis on paradox. I cannot go into the topic here, even though the Gnostics have the most wonderful statements about the paradoxical truth of the psyche. However, these texts are rather difficult and at times confusing. It would lead us too far astray. Their core message, however, as I see it, is the following. Any truth, any true encounter with the spirit of the depths takes away from man the belief that he can rule his life by reason or by intellect. That is, it takes away the illusion that he can ever fully understand his life and the mystery of the world. Wholeness requires conscious acceptance of the paradox, of the Wiedersehen, of that which makes no sense to our mind. In other words, as we shall see, it requires us to accept the madness of our own darkness. And so, exactly, I couldn't, if you had asked me in, let's say, 1969, when I was a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, um, if I would go to law school and then stop practicing law, I would have said something like, "Are you kidding me? I would never go to law school." and uh, and because in part because I didn't think I could make it in law school at the time. It turned out that I went to a little lefty college that still believed in grading, and so I had a what I would call a low B average at the end. I nearly flunked out of the school at the beginning, and oh my gosh. So I wasn't thinking that I was law school or graduate school material at the time. Um, and so anyway, I would have thought it was madness. And even at the beginning of law school, I wouldn't have thought anything like that. Or even on the day that I started to practice law, I wouldn't have thought that. So just listen to this text at the beginning of chapter 5 of Liber Primus, Descent to Hell and into the Future. Jung is still struggling here with the spirit of the depths. A loud voice called, "I am falling." Jung, speaking to himself, responded, "Should I entrust myself to this confusion?" I shuddered. It is a dreadful depth. And addressing the soul, he continues, "Do you want me to leave myself to chance, to the madness of my own darkness? Whither, whither? You fall, and I want to fall with you, whoever you are." End quote. It seems that he had lost the ground under his feet and was now completely exposed to the madness of his own darkness. Following his soul, he let himself fall into unknown depths, but it is obvious that this madness simultaneously relieved him. It was a redeeming revelation. Thus the text continues, quote, "The spirit of the depths opened my eyes, and I caught a glimpse of the inner things, the world of my soul, the many formed and changing," unquote. Finally, at the end of the same chapter 5, it becomes clear that this commitment to one's own madness, which is in fact the madness of the clinging to the heroic, implies, quote, "The heroic in you is the fact that you are ruled by the thought that this or that is good, that this or that goal must be attained in headlong striving work. Consequently, you sin against incapacity, meaning you commit a sin by not admitting your incapacity or your impotence," unquote. The very moment when Jung let himself fall into the abyss, the spirit of the depths opened his eyes. He caught a glimpse of the inner world and his soul, and of the psychic world beyond any Christian delusions. He now realized that love, soul, and God are beautiful and terrible. What a profound insight indeed. Okay, so you want to comment on any of that, Jordan, before I go on?
Yes, that what's interesting, very simply. I mean, you wrote experience on the sidebar, the marginalia of the other page, and numbers 4 through 9, look and see, that's experience. And so I think what's happening here, just literally your marginalia, experience, one word, no
Yeah.
intent. You may have intent, but to me, control is irrelevant. Navigation is important. And I think in experience, intention is overrated. It's more important the way something came across. Because if over and over you have to say, well, the thought counts, well, yeah, but you're not implementing correctly. Meaning you keep too many failures in a row causes harm to other people because they start to notice that you're now not reliable. Now, if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. But I think the thing is the experience of, if I do this, while I'm driving, look at all the mistakes. I'm not going in a straight line. All these are mistakes. That's the kind of mistake we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just experience to continually tune and tailor. So I think here with the God are beautiful, and love, soul, and God are beautiful and terrible. And I think what's interesting about that is that's about connection. And there's I would put
Kathy says your navigation. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously you have to navigate in some way. And, Paul Simon said that he had a dream when he decided to do the album Seven Psalms, his most recent album, which is quite a lovely album for us older folks, at least, because it really puts a sharp point on what God is. But he knew how to navigate that from that dream. And meanwhile, I had a dream about 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, where something told me to go into teaching. Now, that's not so strange in the sense that because I didn't think I was going to law school or graduate school, I thought I might become a teacher. And so when I was in college, I took the teacher's prep courses and I did a full practice teaching, the whole 9 yards. So when I graduated from college, I was not only commissioned as a second lieutenant, but um, I was also certified to teach social studies in the state of New York temporarily. And later, when I got my JD degree, the state of New York gave me permanent certification. So I've been permanently certified to teach school since 1974, but I never taught a day. I never taught a single day until 3 years ago when I started to teach uh, as a substitute, just to get my feet wet and see what was what in the Maryland community. So I did that for a year, and that was an interesting experience too. But throughout all of that, obviously, I navigated away from teaching, but my unconscious told me 3 years ago, why don't you go teach? And so I did. I followed that dream, and so far it's working out. And I'm actually enjoying it quite a lot, even though I'm in a tough position. But anyway, um,
It's
so
interesting too, though, when you started that, we began to get a non-hidebound description from the experience of what is the education system now.
yeah,
I mean, then I look at, oh, we should have this and we should have that. And people say, we haven't had that in 20 civics, economics. We haven't had that in 25 years. And,
hmm
I was all, oh, really? Okay. Well, that's kind of odd.
yeah. Well, I have had a number of those experiences where, believe it or not, they do not teach grammar or spelling in our schools
And,
anymore. And I'm
and
saying,
go figure, people get off topic because they don't have any syntax or any way with the language to actually give them an anchor to their own idea. And so it's easily misinterpreted because you're actually not speaking clearly in the first place.
yeah, right. So Richard says, Spirit of the depths equals keeper of the realms. The same spirit touched my eyes, and I will be paying the price for it till my dying day. It's no fun to see in the realm of these days. It's all plastered. Um, and so, okay, I'm not quite sure what Richard is saying there, but um, eh, you know,
Is he talking about being forcibly hidebound by his experiences? The plastered to me sounds like somehow concrete shoes in a way, or
yeah.
stuck to a
So
wall.
I think that's what he means. Meanwhile, Kathy says they're not teaching cursive either, and that's correct. And so, very interestingly, I was substituting in my English class last week, and I had only one student this particular day, and I offered to teach her how to write either a novel or a poem, and she said, "Would you teach me cursive?" And so, in 1 hour, I taught this eighth grade girl how to write in cursive. Uh,
Well, I've seen the new old joke of the only thing we need to do to take over the world now is get a bunch of manual transmission vehicles, and the only thing we need to do to hide our plans is write them in cursive because that would be the new code. They couldn't steal our vehicles, so it's an anti-theft device, and
yeah.
they couldn't crack our code because they can't write in cursive.
Right. So Jan Doe says, "Happy birthday, Skip. Such a cool cane. Reminds me of the rod of Asclepius." Interesting. I don't
Nice.
know. Do you know what the rod of Asclepius is?
Actually, you do too. It's the caduceus.
Oh, it's the caduceus, of
Because
course.
Asclepius, the father of medicine, and then you have next to it his daughter Hygeia, who rules well-being, and she has the the goblet with the snake going in and out and around it.
I see. Okay.
So the goblet being the psyche, and then he has the structure of the medicine. So
Yeah.
Caduceus,
Yeah.
I've
Okay.
it's
So reading on here, let's see if we can get to the end of this essay. It's 3 more pages. Should be able to do it, I would guess. So now we must let go of the illusion of knowing what is good for myself and for those to whom I feel close. Whoever pretends to know what is good and what is evil, thus says the Red Book, commits a sin against incapacity. And it is true. We are often convinced to do the good, but how can we really know what spirit is ruling us? The spirit of the depths, or rather the spirit of this time. The cruelest deeds and the worst crimes have always been and still are perpetrated in the name of the good and even in the name of God. Therefore, I truly love Paul's passage in Romans 7 because it is deeply and eternally true. Quote, I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. And realizing how painful this insight actually is, Paul finishes the chapter by exclaiming, Wretched man, what I am, wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? From Romans 7:15 to 19 and 24, unquote. Paul was a wise man, indeed full of Jewish wisdom. There is a beautiful passage in the last chapter of Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which some 40 years later takes up this idea from the Red Book of not really knowing what is good and what is evil. The world, quote, the world into which we are born is brutal and cruel, and at the same time of divine beauty. Which element we think outweighs the other, whether meaninglessness or meaning, is a matter of temperament. Probably, as in all metaphysical questions, both are true. Life is or has meaning and meaninglessness. I cherish the anxious hope that meaning will preponderate and win the battle, unquote. This is what the Red Book calls Wiedersehen, that which is opposed to any meaning, the painful fact that life is deeply meaningful and at the same time without meaning, and at times even spiritless. And this is what the spirit of the depths calls the highest truth. This truth, however, can only be accepted through the sacrifice of the solar hero, the sacrifice of everything too clear, too bright, too good, in short, the sacrifice of our illusion of control. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, this reminds me of a concept I have now that I call sapphire thinking, where just the words know thyself over the philosophy door is the first lie, the first trickster. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a couple of weeks ago, someone said, do you know thyself? I mean, they were kind of, messing around. And I went, that's asking a bit much.
Yeah.
That's just asking a bit much. And they said, well, what do you mean? How do you need to know yourself? And I said, there are two things. First, 5 words, always complete, never finished, lifelong. Know myself is a bunch of BS. I need to live myself. Now, I have a driver's license for myself, but I don't know where I'm going to go half the time. But I call it sapphire thinking, whereas sapphire is completely, if a sapphire was conscious, it might be completely aware of its unique crystalline lattice structure and nature. It might even know its hardness rating on the Mohs scale. But if you say, Sapphire, do you know thyself? At best, it's going to roll its eyes at you and just continue to do things that sapphires do. So I think that, when someone says, do you know yourself? I think a lot of people get lost in getting stuck in healing and saying how much healing they're doing and look at these hierarchical levels that I see almost for spiritual elitism. I have my scars are bigger than your scars, and I have healed more than you. And I think it's a bunch of bunk. So I think here Paul's. I've never heard it put this. I haven't seen this passage, and there's a paradox there of what he's saying versus what he's meaning. And in a sense, by putting himself down so much, so intensely, he's actually not having a false sense of humility. He's getting down to the nitty gritty. And I
Yeah.
think then that brings in sapphire thinking. It also brings in your word experience. Look and see. And then from that, what's your perspective rather than what do you intellectually know?
Uh, so Brundage Big Bungalow 2 says, I've started my individuation path recently. The hero myth is necessary for me to confront the depths. I need the courage too. Well, yes, you do. But on the other hand, um, if you took it away, something else would happen. And that's where individuation is. Because the more you try to do something, and you might even succeed, as I did by, becoming a Marine officer and by um, getting a law degree and then an MBA. Those were all great successes. I was trying, and I certainly felt I needed the hero myth to achieve all that. Um, but in the end, they don't get you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And
In the end, I mean, it was like I used to fly into Jeddah about once every 2 months, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which is the summer home of the kings of Saudi Arabia, the royal family. And
oh, you froze, or maybe I did.
last time, it's exactly the same. There's nothing new here. And I sort of was asking myself, and I didn't know it at the time, what are you doing wrong? What was I doing wrong? And
The video froze, I think, right when you went into what Jeddah is and where.
okay, so Jeddah is the home of the royal family in the summertime, and it's a Red Sea seaport. It's a beautiful city. It's called the city of art because it has many larger than life size sculptures that are really impressive. Um, and but every time I would fly into it, I'd look down and the buildings would be going by and we'd just be landing at the airport. And I would say to myself, oh my God, you can go around the world multiple times and there you are, you're still there.
Mhm.
Wherever you are, you're still there, even if you're on the opposite side of the world. And you can't get away from that. And so you have to understand yourself. Now, I was in the midst of my early study into Jungian psychology at that time, um, but I hadn't come to any conclusions yet, I would say. And, in the end, you have to be. In the end, you have to be. Um,
That speaks to the courage and bravery that is being struggled with that heroes piece there with the comment. Because to me, I think what's interesting about courage and bravery, don't confuse it with trying to become prom king or prom queen. It's
yeah,
not a shiny, brilliant thing.
yeah,
It's literally don't waste trouble. Courage and bravery is really actually pretty mundane.
Yeah.
It's engaging every moment in your life, but like you're driving a car, you're not controlling. The courage is surrender, to navigate. And it's interesting to me where if I look, I'm losing the word. The meek. The meek shall inherit the earth. It's one of the most misinterpreted biblical passages there is. Well, one definition is to surrender completely to the divine. The other is that you need to be dangerous. Now, that doesn't mean violence. That is a metaphor of I am a master swordsman, but I walk through town with my sword sheathed.
Yeah.
And then what happens then, I'm strong enough to be gentle. I'm fierce enough to be compassionate. So the courage and bravery is not just listening to other people. It's listening to your environment so it can tell you how to navigate. So there's a connection to nature. And I think that is really that individuation piece that leads you out of hell. And actually, I laugh right into the hell that is life every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Except you get used to don't waste trouble. Find the treasure in the trouble.
Yeah.
And then the courage and bravery is not valor or I'm riding in on my horse regal and look, I have my staff held high, and whether there's bounty on the top or some rival's head, that's not courage and bravery.
Yeah.
That's hubris. After the fact, you're still celebrating something that now no longer was. So in a sense, that's the shiny living in the past. So I think part of that, and hopefully this helps the comment or uncrack courage and bravery, not hubris. It's capital YOU, whatever that is. And
Yep.
you shed the skins, and the skins are not missed. You emerge as you always were, but not hidebound by what you thought you were supposed to be.
Right. I remember once in Saudi Arabia, I had a colleague with me, and my colleague wanted to buy our dress. He wanted to have it to come home with. And I was too embarrassed to ask where we should buy our dress. But finally, he asked our host, and he said, "Oh, I'll buy you for it. I'll buy it for you, but on condition that you never wear it to a Halloween party, and and that you wear it every day that you're in Saudi Arabia." And so I made 23 trips to Saudi Arabia, and this was like the first day of my second trip. And thereafter, all during several years that I worked in Saudi Arabia, about 10 years, I always dressed in Arab dress. And I had quite a wardrobe at the end. I still do have it packed away somewhere. I don't expect to go back to the kingdom anytime soon, although I would do if invited. But in any case, the first morning we come out and meet each other at the elevator, and as we're getting into the elevator, there's two young girls who are in their black abayas, and the two of us just cracked up, and then these girls started to laugh, and it was like like a barrel of monkeys in that elevator because we're just laughing at ourselves. But I took it quite seriously, and when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and so I found that in some countries in the Middle East, it's really welcome if you do that, and certainly Saudi Arabia is one of those countries, and in others, it's hated. And so I went to a party for a trade event once, And I thought everybody was going to be in Arab dress because it was all Arabs at this event. And everybody was in Western dress. I was the only one in Arab dress. And the reason was that the the Emiratis had, are competitive with the Saudis, and they don't like Saudi dress. And they don't like guys like me wearing Emirati dress either, and you have to know the difference. Um,
I think that's a point right there. You have to know the difference. So even if I say when in Rome, still sticking back to the um, courage question for individuation, when in self, do what you do. That can be a difficult thing for people. And I would say, simply put, okay, what's an action item? Lose weight, lose the weight of other people's opinions. And so like you have a great example there where you walked in and pretty much all you have is the weight of other people's opinions because you walked in with the different garb, the different dress.
right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go on with the next page. We have two more pages to go. At the beginning of the Red Book, there is already a beautiful passage on sacrifice. These are the words of the Spirit of the Depths. Quote, sacrifice is not destruction. Sacrifice is the foundation stone of what is to come. Have you not had monasteries? Have you not countless thousands gone into the desert? You should carry the monastery in yourself. The desert is within you. The desert calls you and draws you back. And if you were fettered in the world of this time with iron, the call of the desert would break all chains. Truly, I prepare you for solitude. End quote. You have a comment on that?
Yeah, walking with the sword sheathed. There's your surrender. I mean,
Yeah.
the sacrifice, surrender, sacrifice not being loss, sacrifice being the loss of your external, hidebound,
Yeah.
unnecessary, superficial, non-identity pieces. And in that sense, you have whittled down or burned down to your own divinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to joke that I was the only Western executive that um, had won $1 million contract wearing a full-length evening gown, which is what a thobe is, like a full-length evening gown. And
Yeah.
and there were, a couple times when,
And a
uh,
church hat. And a church hat. I
yeah,
mean,
that's right. Yeah, because I had to wear the thobe and
yeah, the
the
robe, etc.
and the Shema. And so, yes, in the desert of solitude, we can overcome the old gods, our highest ideals and convictions, which have ruled our life. However, old habits die hard. This is why the Red Book speaks of a terrible sacrifice that erupted with force, sweeping away with a powerful wave everything unnecessary. Now, at the very moment the murder is committed, a surprising twist happens. The cruel words of the Spirit of the Depths saved him, and like a rain after a long hot spell, they swept away everything in him which was too highly tensed. This rain is fructifying and renewing the earth. It begets the new wheat, the young, germinating God. This long expected God is Faunus, the divine child. I summarize these reflections on the frightening fall into the abyss and the renewal from the depths of the earth with a passage from the I Ching. It stems from the hexagram 51, thunder, which is a yang line beneath two yin lines. Or as Master Alfred Huang put it, buried underneath two yielding lines. It is an explosion of yang energy from within the depth of the earth, thunder which burst forth from the earth like an earthquake. However, the ancient Chinese masters compared it with the explosion of the creative in spring. Richard Wilhelm gave a revealing comment on this image. The shock that comes from the manifestation of God within the depths of the earth makes man afraid, but this fear of God is good, for joy and merriment can follow upon it. So it is no surprise that chapter 8 of the Red Book, following the murder of the hero, talks about, quote, the conception of the God, that is, the birth of the divine child.
Before we go on to
Yeah.
the last piece, I as you were reading that, got through it, it really unpacked the word tensed for me. And I wrote in the margin, tensed as in flexed, too tight. Also tensed as in past, present, future, too time specific.
Yeah.
And if it's not too time specific, it can move to the eternal. And it can move to the eternal, then back to look and see to the perpetual present.
Right.
So becoming not too tensed comes back to your look and see, navigate and experience.
Yeah.
And that is quite a difficult piece of courage and bravery in anyone's process, individuation or otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think that too tensed, like, okay, you go to a massage therapist and, your whole left side or your right side is too tensed.
Yeah.
Well, and look at your fresh new perspective when you walk out and you're not too tensed. You're not stuck in time, basically.
Righto. And what was I going to? Well, I was going to say that Jung, when this happened to him, he was in his late 30s. He was a made psychiatrist at the time. He had served at least 10 years at the Bergholzli, which was an insane asylum in Zurich. And he'd actually lived in the building with the patients. He and his family did live in the building. And so you can imagine a professional like that can be very tight about, what it is they're doing and what they should do, how they should do it, blah, blah, blah. But then when this change comes and they start thinking about other things, it's quite impressive. I mean, even going with the comparison of me with George W. Bush, after his presidency, which I'm sure was a very tense time, he went to art, he went to painting, as I have, and so you have to relax enough to let something happen. I'm not saying it's art, it can be whatever it is, but
relax enough to be your own nature. And
yeah,
then you don't talk about it, you do it. And it's interesting to me, it reminds me of the Argentinian film Man Facing Southeast. And there's this guy and he keeps getting put into prison. And it's an insane asylum kind of prison. But he keeps also getting released. And when he comes in, he paints in the morning and then he walks out into the courtyard, faces southeast, stands there all day long until the sunset, goes and eats dinner, goes to sleep. Well, every morning the same, painting, standing, facing, eating, sleeping. Well, the sheriff on about the 6th or 7th time talking to the warden says, look, he's always coming back in here, but when you let him out, he's fine. And how do you know to let him out? He goes, oh, that's the easiest thing. His art goes to shit. So he's ready for society again when his art goes to all hell. And
Yeah.
when he comes in, his art is, he's been, criminalized, but his art is wonderful and
Mhm.
inspiring. And what it is he's become himself again, but that doesn't fit into the status quo of normalcy. So in a sense, he's that red umbrella going the different direction through the sea of black umbrellas going the opposite direction.
Yeah. I,
And
I
that
do
doesn't
want
fit.
I do want to talk about that in terms of art in a few minutes, but I want to finish this essay first. So let me
Perfect.
read the last page. This is the birth of the divine child. We have heard that the title of Liber Primus is the way of what is to come. Only gradually we learn that what is to come is nothing less than the divine child. It is the inner child that will be, or is to be, created in you. The human psyche is the dwelling place of that child. Humans become the birthplace of the new God image. Therefore, the path of individuation is a path into the future, since the child always means future life. The Red Book puts it beautifully. Quote, "The spirit of the depths taught me that my life is encompassed by the divine child. From his hand, everything unexpected came to me, everything living. This child is what I feel as an eternally springing youth in me." Unquote. However, we should not cherish any illusions about the child. In chapter 8, the conception of God, we hear again about it, but this time of its rather ambiguous nature. Quote, "The divine child approached me out of the terrible ambiguity, the hateful beautiful, the evil good, the laughable serious, the sick healthy, the inhuman human, and the ungodly godly. Psychologically, this child refers to wholeness as the goal of the individuation process. Decades later, according to C.G. Jung, in Answer to Job, interpreted the birth of the divine child in the context of John's vision of the apocalyptic sun woman, Revelation 12, as the coming of consciousness of coming to consciousness of the self. As a result, Jung became personally involved in the divine drama. This is what happens to everyone who is confronted with the spirit of the depths and who is, as a consequence, embraced by the divine child. And this is how Jung, yearning for the new light, praises the divine child. Quote, "My God, I love you as a mother loves the unborn, whom she carries in her heart. We need your light, O child. Since we go in darkness, light up our paths. May your light shine before us. May your fire warm the coldness of our life." Unquote.
Interesting about tensed there, where
Yeah.
instead of children of God, it's like that's too tense. Grow up, become an adult of, and then don't worry about the age. Just be yourself.
Yeah. Right. And so, um, my only reservation about what Richard is saying here, the woman is Mary, mother of Jesus, is that these things are happening within us at all times, in all moments. And when we recognize that, I mean, Jesus was one model of these types of things of the divine child and so on. And for centuries he has been the only divine model. But today we can point to many. Okay, we can even point to, for example, Elizabeth Cheney and Dick Cheney, who um, have come out and seeing that their way in the past has got to be overcome. And then I'm sure there will be something new, but their way of what is to come is that um, they're changing their hidebound approach to the world, I guess is the way I would say it.
Yeah, the whole Jesus and Mary chain piece, notwithstanding was it Papyrus 66 where Mary is changed to Martha to put people off the trail. To me, if I look at, the whole, what's his name? Holy Grail quotes, the Holy Grail quest starts with a P, to go into the Arthurian, go into the darkest point. Anyway, I can't remember his name. The mythical piece. Thing is, going to search for the Holy Grail, Jesus and Mary together are the Holy Grail. So again, know thyself is a trickster.
Yeah.
When you're given the answer in the question. And so it's interesting to me, and that's my perspective, and maybe my brain damage, but I think the container and the contained. Now, which one is the Holy of Holies, and which one is the host? Which one is what's in the host? So whether Jesus is the container and she's the contained, the blood of life, or vice versa. And then you take the metaphor of Jesus on the cross is also the Holy Grail because he is the vessel releasing the blood of life. So there's a whole lot of ways I think that interpretation gets in the way because there are multiple ways to look at it. So again, I think the theme you put forth for your birthday and that look and see from Numbers, I think is important because the look and see is to experience, not to intellectually convince or factually present. It's understanding not to be so limited by your time and to be more connected to the divinity, which is perpetual and always alive. Yeah. Or you are the Holy Grail. You and your are the Holy Grail.
Indeed. And that's one of the things that that's a theme throughout all the lessons that we've been giving.
Right.
Is that the human being, each human being is the Holy Grail. And so the Nazis, for example, went around all over Europe and every place looking for the Holy Grail.
As if some magical talismanic device kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And
which is basically tail chasing, navel gazing, trying to go find something that actually is in your pocket the whole time, so to speak.
Yeah. So anyway, moving on here. Next week, we will be working with an essay entitled Imagination for Evil by Liliana Libiano Waba. And Dr. Waba did an interview with me several years back during the Wisdom Path work. And I hope you'll all go back and look at that. You can look it up by just putting that name into this YouTube channel, and it should pop right up, I guess, because I never delete anything. Or if I do, it's because it's by the boards, like notices about when there'll be a session and when there won't be. But in any case, I think that you'll enjoy working with me and Jordan on this essay. And so meanwhile, I want to just use a little bit of the rest of this time. I guess we'll conclude our evaluation of the essays for the time being. But I wanted to share with you kind of my definition of abstract art and why it's significant. And this came to me rather late in life, I would say. I mean, along with most other modern American men, at least, uh, for the longest time, I would look at Jackson Pollock's drip paintings and say, you know, what's special about that? And I wouldn't understand why Picasso and other abstract artists were so popular. And the answer finally came to me, and that is that they are putting you in connection with your own unconscious. If if I give you any handle, and I guess I usually do by giving a title to a piece, but if I give you any handle, um, it it guides what you think about the work of art. And but abstract art, the objective is to get you in communication with your own unconscious. Okay, and so all these people, Kandinsky and de Kooning and all those guys, in most cases, they were putting actual physical features into their work. You know, Dali would put out in the middle of the desert, he'd put a chair or something like that, whatever it was, sometimes an upside down chair, whatever. But it would be something that actually has form. And the problem with that is that's already directing your consciousness um, to his consciousness. But when I'm painting, I'm not trying to show you my unconscious. I'm trying to show you your unconscious. And in that sense, you know, I'm starting to see what my unconscious does. And so um, I took up a slightly different style of Rocky painting in the last few weeks, where instead of drawing a doodle, which is very form oriented, I'm simply letting the paint form itself randomly as it chooses to do, and I select the colors kind of randomly.
It's
And
interesting because thematically, I remember when I was painting in oils with my hands and big silkscreen gloves, it was abstract expressionist. And what's interesting, when someone would buy a painting, I would always say, you're buying a relic. The real thing would be to buy sitting at the table behind me silently watching it occur, because that's where the meaning happened, is in the making, the doing of the painting, or a video of it happening. But the painting is now just shed skin, and it's just a
yeah, but
record of
I
the
can't
experience.
I cannot express that. Okay, in other words, when I'm painting, um, I am not expressing what's happening in my own psyche because what I'm doing is I'm examining my own psyche in the form of a meditation, perhaps, to see what emerges. But there's no way that I can convey what's happening in my psyche. I mean, as I draw lines and so on,
Yeah, that's true.
um, I, you know, I can sit there for 2 hours and there will be all sorts of things coming up in my head. And I know that I can never express that, and no artist could.
Right.
Uh, right. And so my objective, and I think that this is sort of the objective of abstract expression, abstract painters, although those that had to give you a chair in the or a bowl or something like that, which is what Picasso would do, or a flower. Um, they felt it had to be somehow hooked on something. And there's a very interesting uh, passage in the movie Pollock, in the movie Pollock, where de Kooning um, says that Jackson has finally broken through, where none of the rest of us have done that yet. And so the point is that, and the point to me, when I first saw Jackson Pollock's strip painting number 31, is that, you know, Jackson Pollock, before he died, when he painted number 31, he had no clue about me, obviously. And I was 8 years old when he died. So he could not have had any clue about what my psyche meant at that point. He didn't know me and didn't know anybody in my family, and I didn't know anybody in his family. And so there wouldn't be any possibility of him connecting to me in the physical way. But when I saw that painting at the Boston Museum of Art, um, it caused me to weep immediately. And there's actual video of that on this YouTube channel, um, of me describing that and actually breaking into tears doing it. And so the question, so what Jackson Pollock did was he got me to communicate with a deep part of myself, not what he was thinking, not what was coming out of him when he painted that drip painting number 31. I wouldn't have any clue what he was thinking about as he did that. But it did get me in touch with something that was within me. And it seems to me that's what abstract painting is doing. And so, anyway, I was recently, and I'm going to show a piece now. I was recently trying to do this new style of mine where I just drop the colors onto the page, a piece of wet paper. And in this case, I used rough watercolor paper. So it's the rough kind of
Cold press, right?
watercolor paper, which I've decided I really don't like using. But I had this piece, so I used it in this case. And when I completed it, I found the piece very dark. And so then I decided and I said, whoa, where's this going? And then I decided, well, I'm going to give it the Rocky treatment anyway to see what happens.
It's
And go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting to me that your experience of weeping when you see drip painting number 31 and de Kooning saying that Pollock broke through. I find that in those experiences, maybe your perspective's different. I find those tears, from my perspective, are not happy or sad or even joyful. It's I have been prompted to spill some of my own beauty.
Mhm.
And in a sense, they connect to us, and their breaking open in that painting breaks us open also.
Mhm.
And, it's like spill a little beauty. It's the mess you don't have to clean up. It's actually nourishing. So the untensing, as it would, of our beauty.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to show you this piece that I actually only finished this morning. Um, and I'll tell you what came to mind. Uh, hmm, is this it? I guess it is. It must be. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so you see um, that this is very dark, and you may not see anything in it. Um, and so I gave it a name. And so, Jordan, can you guess what name I gave it?
Apocalyptica.
It's close. I named it Halloween,
Oh, nice. Okay.
right?
Look at, yeah, okay.
And and actually the name came to me. I hadn't completed the Rocky bit on the, I guess, left quarter of this piece. This is only an 8.5 by 11 piece of watercolor paper. Um, so I hadn't finished the Rocky treatment on the left side, and but I looked at the rest of it, and it just made me think of Halloween, and we're in the Halloween season, and we're thinking about Halloween. So, something in the collective unconscious is causing that to come up in my mind. Um,
It's interesting, right? When you said that, then of course I start seeing different faces than I was seeing already. And so then I start looking for ghouls and goblins and things that are creepy, crawly, scary in the night kind of stuff. And it's interesting that I was feeling sunset at sunset through forest uh,
mhm.
at first, and then when you said Halloween, it it flipped, and the character started coming out of the forest differently, as it were.
Interesting.
So
Very
even the
interesting.
word Halloween, you basically punched in a translator,
Hmm.
and there's a whole unburdened piece. Lose the weight of other people's opinions. Where
Yeah,
when you begin to show these, you say, "I'm not going to burden you. I'm not going to burden you with a title. I'm not going to lead you astray, as it were." But as I was kind of spilling my own beauty into oh, look at the sunset and the forest, and it's kind of creepy, but it's kind of cool. And then you said Halloween, and all of a sudden I see this little alien face at the bottom, and these other
yeah,
little furrowed eyebrows, and they're all
right.
looking right at me. And so it's interesting how instant the preconception flowed in, which I find interesting because my whole thing is try to inspect my expectations, but I know full well I'm no better at it than anyone else. You
Yeah,
know,
sure,
I can,
sure.
the more I go into it, the more I probably fool myself. So,
Right. So you probably had a thought about this before I told you what my name for it is.
and
Um,
right when you did, it detonated my thought into oblivion. And then I started, wandering around like a kid in a candy store. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Oh, Halloween this, Halloween that.
yeah. Yeah. So what I'm finding interesting is as I'm doing this work, and I don't find it work, I've been doing it as meditation. Um, but when I'm doing it, I'm actually having sort of a play-by-play going on in my own mind, and I find it very interesting. I'm not trying to direct it, or at least up until the last quarter on the left side, when I did the rest of the Rocky, I had no conception of what this was going to be. And then I looked at it and I said, "Oh, this is like a Halloween Woods type thing." And so then I had that in mind for the rest as I finished it. Um, but that's sort of how my unconscious works. And and so I want to encourage everyone to um, consider trying this type of artwork. Um, and you can find out more about it in the book Art and Spirit by Colleen Kibert, where she describes this technique in detail. And I've talked to her multiple times on this channel, so you can get her philosophy of art and method of doing things, but it it just is a terrific way to connect with your own unconscious. Now, I'm not claiming that this is art. And Jung, I didn't really understand what he meant when he said this is not art. Uh, this is something else. And what he meant, in my view, is that he was, by doing his artwork, he was getting something out of his unconscious that he hadn't found before.
It's like records of life. And
Yeah,
it's interesting because when you detonated my idea, the funny thing is, you didn't really. I was sitting there, beautifully directionless, sunset from within the forest.
yeah,
Well, it's the forest, but oh, it's Halloween. So all of a sudden you gave me telemetry. I mean, the 5% of research being what direction am I going to go,
yeah,
live the Halloween into being. But
yeah,
just the concept, just the actual thing, forest, I was there. And then you kind of, pointed, when you said Halloween, you basically pointed a different direction and I turned that way. And
yeah.
I think that's
And,
interesting because it flowed what I was getting from within to pour in from a different faucet, basically.
yeah. And interestingly enough, I found a few spots that I missed, like right in this passage here. I didn't put the Rocky in there and there and there. And so I may go back upstairs and put a little bit more into it, but I'm actually going to give this piece to the art teacher at my school to show the kids.
Oh no.
Um, and I'm not trying to sell anything here. So um, it's just to talk about how you can communicate with your own unconscious by doing something creative, whatever it is, but certainly something that is abstract, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm arriving at, I guess.
Well, and it's interesting with that piece too. There's um, some people have more, rods in their eyes than cones, and they can see better at night, like a
Hmm.
cat. And cones are color, rods are black and white. But it's interesting because there's the physical predisposition to being able to see better at night, and then there's the trained disposition to not look for objects. You're looking for the blacker in the black
Yeah,
because living things absorb light. So instead of being able, one thing about navigating at night is you're navigating the not knowing. You're not looking for something, you're looking for nothings.
yeah,
And it's interesting that looking in that painting, I started to look into the darks, the big green triangle, dragon head looking down on, green,
yeah.
black.
One trick that my friend John Ebersberger taught me was to wear a baseball cap so that it shades your eyes. So, for
Yes.
example, right here, I have this tensor light here to light up this side of my face. But if I hold a visor up over it,
Mm-hmm.
you see that I get dark here. And what you do is if you wear a visor, it could be a tennis visor, it doesn't have to be a baseball cap. It allows your irises to open more
Yeah, take
and
it.
and see more color, and that's very useful sometimes.
And
Um,
same kind of thing too is to hold your eyes closed for about a minute at night
mhm.
and then open them looking down and then slowly bring them up into, view frame stuff. Um, Lots of different ways to see in the dark and or to navigate in the dark.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's enough for this week. We'll be doing Dr. Waba's essay, An Imagination for Evil, next week, and that'll be fun. And
On the 13th.
yeah, just really apropos. And
Yeah.
apparently Richard is weirding out here. He says, Holy Mary, Mother of God, please pray for us sinners and spread the effect of thy grace of your flame of love over these people and the whole world. Well, thank you for that wish, Richard. And we'll see you next time. And we'll see how long my cane survives. By the way, these canes are beautiful. They're available on Amazon, and I'll just show you again. And it's made in Ukraine,
Oh,
and
interesting.
so it's keeping the artisans of Ukraine in business, and they make all kinds of different critters on canes, including eagles and cats and wolves and you name it, but they're quite special. Um, and so I'm delighted that it's made in Ukraine as well. So Kathy and everyone, thank you all for being here. We will call it a quits for today. And